In a tale that's as old as the Jewish Talmud, there were four rabbis who had a series of ongoing theological arguments, arguing the finer points of the Torah, and three were always in alignment against the fourth. And one day the odd rabbi out, after the usual 3-1 majority rules statement that meant that he had once again lost, he decided to appeal to a higher authority. "O Lord of the universe," he prayed, "I know in my heart that I am right and they are wrong. Please provide a sign to prove it to them." It was a beautiful sunny day, but as soon as the rabbi finished his prayer, a storm cloud moved across the sky right above the other three. It rumbled and it roared and then it dissipated. And the fourth rabbi cried out with joy. He said, "See, I knew it. I'm vindicated." But the other three disagreed. They pointed out that a storm like that could arise on any warm day and that it proved nothing. So the rabbi prayed again, "O Lord of the universe, I need a bigger sign to show them that I am right and they are wrong." And so this time an even larger cloud appeared. It rumbled and it roared, and there was also a bolt of lightning that struck a tree right beside the other three rabbis. "How much more do you need to see?" the odd rabbi out said to his friends. And they said, "Nuon, nuon." It means nothing, nothing. It could happen like that on any day of the week. And so finally the lone rabbi prayed one more time, "O Lord of the universe, give me the biggest sign of all to prove to them that I am right and they are wrong." And this time the entire sky turned black. There was thunder, there was lightning, there was hail. The earth shook and a deep booming voice called out from heaven, "My children, He is right and you are wrong." The three rabbis huddled together for a moment and they said, "Mashugana, mashugana," which is Yiddish for "you're crazy." You're crazy because it's still 3 against 2. We win. There is within Jewish spirituality that exact kind of contrariness. It's faith for sure, but it is never quite settled. It is this ongoing wrestling match with each other and especially with God, as their faith tradition is a stubborn one. It's a gutsy one. It's one loaded with chutzpah, my favorite Yiddish word in the world. Chutzpah is audacity. It's more than courage. It's courage without shame. It's brass, moxie, nerve, determination against all odds. A person who holds power cannot have chutzpah. Chutzpah can only be possessed by the underdog, by the little guy, by the loser. But the loser finds a way to defy convention, to ask for more than is deserved, and to obtain what should not be granted by sheer guts and determination and imagination. A person with chutzpah ends up being a recipient of grace because that's all that's left that you can give to him or to her. In the Yiddish Proverbs, there is a story about a young man, and in the middle of the night, for whatever reason, he wakes and he goes to his parents' bedroom where they are sleeping, and he kills them in their sleep. He is promptly arrested and put in jail, and not long thereafter he is brought before the judge for trial. And when he stands before the judge, he appeals for mercy and clemency and a full pardon for his actions. And the judge is scandalized by this and says, "How dare you ask for mercy after the way that you have behaved. And the young man's defense was this, that he must receive mercy because he was an orphan. Chutzpah. Have you got it? And in biblical lore, the examples are plenty. The first example that leaps to mind is David and Goliath. I mean, here is a sunburned teenager, the runt of the litter, a dew-eyed singer-songwriter who spends his day singing to sheep. And he goes down to this standoff at the local demilitarized zone and finds the Incredible Hulk terrorizing the neighborhood. And the first thought that he has, and I don't know how to, I'm just going to say it plainly. The first thought that he has, the first thing out of his mouth is, I can whip his ass. He's never been in a fight in his entire life. That's chutzpah. It's audacity. And the Jewish people learned it from their namesake. The Jewish state is called Israel. It means to wrestle with God. In our reading today, this Hebrew patriarch Jacob, grandson of Father Abraham, is in this wrestling match with God, or at least a physical manifestation of who he perceived God to be. And I can see the two duking it out. In my mind, it's much more like one of today's mixed martial arts cage fights than a simple fist fight. There's sweat, and there's blood, and there's flying punches, and there's kicks to the head, and there's drool, and there's exhaustion. The image before you is the work of Jack Baumgartner. It's a startling work of art. Their bodies are twisted together, God and man locked in mortal combat. And God says to Jacob something that I used to say to my kids when we would wrestle, but I was tired of wrestling. I would say, now that's enough. But just like my children, he didn't know when to stop. Jacob won't let go. Here is his audacity on display. He had this contrary nerve to fight with God, but he did not have the ability to know when to stop fighting. So God stops it for him with just a touch. God hasn't shown even a fraction of his strength, not really. And just that touch, and he dislocates Jacob's hip. That'll put you on the ground fairly quickly. But even after he is beaten into the mud, crawling around in his own blood and displaced joints, he is still hanging and holding on. He is still clinging to God's ankles, but now more like a drowning man than a fighting man. And that's where Jacob belongs, actually. The name Jacob means heel grabber. You see, when Jacob was born, he was the second of a set of twins. His older brother Esau was born first. And when Esau came from the womb, Jacob followed quickly thereafter. And as Esau was born, Jacob had a hold of Esau's heel, his ankle, with his hand. From the very beginning of his life, Jacob was always trying to pull someone else back or down so that he could be first in line. So they named him properly the heel grabber, the ankle holder, the one who causes others to stumble. In the Hebrew, his name means trickster, scrapper. He's a hustler. And he lived up to the name, or we might say he lived down to that name. He duped his doting mother. He tricked his blind father on his own deathbed to have him change the will and stole his older brother's inheritance. He bamboozled his father-in-law in a colossal business deal and amassed a fortune by conniving and cutting corners and take advantage of the gullibility and the stupidity of others. He could find a way through an abundance of guts and a lack of conscience to get what he wanted. So every time he said, "My name is Jacob," he was making a confession about his life, his behavior, and the choices that he had made. And now, grabbing hold of the heels of God, he still has the chutzpah running out of his ears, and he has the brazenness to ask God for a blessing. It's preposterous. He doesn't deserve it. He deserves the vengeance of his brother, who hasn't seen him in 20 years and who is waiting for him in the morning. He deserves the blood and the mud. He deserves to be left there, crippled, outside of the promised land, suffering with his deceptions and with his crimes, from his own hubris, crawling around on the ground, afraid, a broken man. That would be fair. And then we could use Jacob as a morality lesson to teach our children how to properly behave. You see, this is what happens to people who only think of themselves, we would say to our children, and point to the broken down Jacob. But that's not exactly what happens. I've so enjoyed picking out a movie to go along with these stories from the book of Genesis over these winter months. Genesis at the movies, I've been calling it. Back to the Future, Gravity, Field of Dreams, Star Wars. There's been some really good movies, and I've had a pick of films to illustrate these great points. And as Anna was saying, depending upon how you tell a story sometimes depends on what movie I would use. But today, there is only one movie that suits Jacob, and it is Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler from 2008. Mickey Rourke himself, not just the role he played, is a Jacob-like character. He was a heartthrob in the 1980s. I heard somebody, yes, Lord, somebody said over here. He was a heartthrob in the 1980s, one of the most successful actors of the decade, before a series of disastrous cinematic flops put him on the outside. So he became a boxer, really. That was his plan B. He became a boxer. And the only thing that brought him was multiple broken bones and a dozen reconstructive facial surgeries that rendered him almost unrecognizable to his fans. And if you don't believe me, go Google his face. But he kept punching. The Wrestler was his return to Hollywood, his return to stardom for the first time in 20 years. He played Randy the Ram Robinson, a washed-up professional wrestler still scraping and fighting to get back to the top of the heap, to get that blessing that he had always wanted. Did he deserve it? Not at all. Randy and Rourke admits that much of the dialogue from the movie was about his own life, was a walking fiasco. Cocaine and women, blowing his money on lavish stupidity and bad business deals, craven for the spotlight and a slave to the cheer of the crowds. He abandoned his own daughter, his own integrity. He ends up working days at a deli counter, wrestling for a few pennies at VFWs on the weekends, reminiscing about how great the 80s were, Guns N' Roses, and his glory days. And he's dating a stripper that, too, is way past her prime. But he is defiant to the end. He says, "I'm just an old broken down piece of meat, and I'm alone, and I deserve to be alone," he says to his daughter, with whom he never reconciles before the film ends. And in his last match, he is shot so full of steroids to compete that his heart, which has already been repaired once, is about to rupture from his chest like a boiling boiler. And he turns to the crowd and he says this: "When you live hard and you play hard and burn the candle at both ends, you can lose everything you love, everything that loves you. A lot of people told me, he's washed up, he's finished, he's a loser, he's all through. But you know what? The only one's going to tell me when I'm through doing my thing is you people here. And with that, he keeps trying to reach for what he does not deserve, what he has not earned. He keeps trying, like Jacob, to get his hands on the prize or die in the process. And the screen goes black on Randy Robinson before we know the outcome. For Jacob, his story goes on. Looking down at him, sweaty and bloody and crying, and now needing a hip replacement from an orthopedic specialist, God asked Jacob a question. What is your name? What a strange question for God to ask. But not really. God is asking Jacob to make his confession. Let's hear it. Who are you? How is it that people refer to you and talk about you? What is it that you have done with your life? Here at the end of yourself, here you are exhausted. Say your name, out with it, let's hear it. And he answers, of course, my name is Jacob. I'm a rascal. I'm a shyster. I'm a fraud. And never had the man been more honest in his entire life. And that honesty, that confession changes his life. God says in response, not anymore. You have wrestled with God and you have prevailed. Your name is now Israel. It had taken decades, not days, for Jacob to arrive at this place. For Jacob to finally get what he wanted, what he needed all along. That fatherly blessing, that declaration of satisfaction. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased, we could say. But he didn't get it because he worked so hard for it. No, he had worked so hard that now he was so exhausted and so at the end of himself that finally he could receive what only God could have given him all along. His moxie took him all the way to the door, but only an unclenched fist could open that door. Only an open and empty hand could accept what was on the other side. It didn't just happen on this one night. For years, God let Jacob just wear himself out with the struggle, using up all his strength, his strategies, his craftiness, and now finally Jacob was done. He was spent. He is deeply wounded, and now he is completely incapable of getting what he wants with his own power, from himself, from others, or even from God. And it is then, only then, that he could receive what was his. Because when you go boxing with God, fight long enough and God is going to win. Ultimately, what a small, wiggling, insecure little boy Jacob still was. What children we still are. We just want that blessing, that affirmation, that love that has no strings or conditions, that unswerving acceptance from somewhere or from someone, and we either never received it or we feel like it was given to somebody else who didn't deserve it, or that we had to work so furiously to even draw the interest of a smile. So we spend our lives searching for it, searching and fighting and hustling and wrestling God and the world, trying to pry from the hands of others what they cannot possibly give us. If you are working the steps and maintaining your sobriety, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, Jacob is your man. If you find yourself careening from one grand idea to another, always intending to make your way to the top to be a winner, and you really don't care who you step on to get there, but you're really never satisfied even when you win, Jacob could be your patron saint. If you have this deep ache within you that you have never been able to soothe, a wound so primal and so early in your life that you cannot heal it, and it has provided you with both your incentive and your insanity for living, Jacob just might be calling your name. Because he knows how to win. He knows how to keep going when everyone else would have quit. He knows how to solve problems, especially those problems that he has created for himself. He knows how to get the most out of the least, but most of all, he knows how to lose. He knows that in losing, in letting go, you discover everything that has been needed all along. He knows that surrender, paradox that it is, brings relief from our present struggles, and it gives us strength to overcome struggles in the future. He knows that only when you have been beaten nearly senseless will you then, and only then, have the sense to listen. He knows that we usually can't work it all out until we have worn ourselves out. He knows that when all doors have been locked and all escape routes have been cut off and all your deal-making cleverness is at the end, then you are at the beginning. He knows that the deepest wounds are the places of our greatest healing. He knows that the longer you deny, avoid, compartmentalize, or rationalize the pain that you are in or the pain that you are causing others, the longer it will take for you to get out of the torture cell you have built around yourself. He knows that you cannot steal, bluff, scheme, or fake your way through life. You can only be honest. And though you may not deserve it, ask for the blessing of grace, because only then will it be yours. When you live hard and play hard and burn the candle at both ends, you can end up losing everything you love and everything that loves you. A lot of people told me he's washed up, he's finished, he's a loser, he's all through. But you know what? That answer is in your hands. It's in your hands.